Sophie Matthews stood frozen outside the courthouse, staring at the divorce papers in her hands. A life she had built with Tristan Cole had shattered before her eyes. The love they had once shared now felt like a distant memory, and as the final decision was made, Sophie's knees buckled, her world spiraling out of control. Alone and devastated, she collapsed, unaware that someone was watching from the shadows. Someone whose presence would change her life in ways she never imagined. The cold pavement beneath her felt like a harsh reminder that nothing in her life had turned out the way she had planned. The bitter sting of betrayal cut deeper than any wound she had ever known. Tristan had shattered her trust, her heart, and her faith in everything they once built together. The pain of their marriage's demise was unbearable, and all she could do was sit there, her breath coming in short gasps as the darkness threatened to swallow her whole. Let us know where you are watching from. Comment below. Subscribe to this channel to support our growth. Just then, a figure appeared in her line of vision. Lawson, a man who had just walked away from his own painful divorce, saw Sophie crumple to the ground. His heart clenched at the sight of her vulnerability. He didn't know her, but in that moment, he couldn't stand to see her so broken. Without a second thought, he rushed to her side, scooping her up in his arms as if he had known her forever. The world seemed to blur around them as Ethan rushed her to the hospital, his heart pounding in his chest, both for the woman in his arms and for the sudden, unexplainable connection he felt toward her. When they arrived, the doctors demanded answers. Ethan's voice was steady, but his words sent a ripple of confusion through the air. "She's my wife," he said, his eyes never leaving Sophie's fragile form. Sophie's mind, clouded by the overwhelming shock, couldn't process the lie he had just told. But she was too exhausted to protest, too numb to care. For now, all she knew was that someone was there. Someone was taking care of her when she had no strength left. And in that fleeting moment, a strange feeling of safety washed over her, one she hadn't felt in a long time. Little did she know, this encounter was only the beginning of a journey that would lead her down a path she could never have anticipated. As Sophie lay in the sterile white hospital room, the beeping of the monitors and the bustle of the nurses faded into the background. She felt numb, as if everything was happening around her but not to her. Her mind wandered back to Tristan, the man she had once vowed to spend her life with. Their marriage had seemed perfect at first, full of love, passion, and shared dreams. But all of that had changed when the truth came out, shattering the illusion she had clung to for so long. Tristan had been unfaithful. The betrayal had cut so deep, Sophie still couldn't understand how it had all happened. How had she not seen the signs? The lies, the late nights, the cold distance between them. She had ignored them, convincing herself that things would get better, that they were just going through a rough patch. But the discovery of his affair had torn through her like a violent storm, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. Now, as she lay in a hospital bed, recovering from the emotional collapse that had followed her divorce, Sophie realized she was not just mourning the loss of her marriage. She was mourning the loss of trust, of her own sense of security, and the future she had once envisioned with Tristan. The truth was, she didn't know what to do next. But there was one thing she was sure of. Her life, as she knew it, had ended. And no matter how hard she tried to make sense of everything, she couldn't find a way forward. Yet, little did she know, someone she'd never expected, was about to step into her life and offer her a chance at something new. Something that would change everything. Sophie slowly opened her eyes, the white hospital room lighting her face like an interrogation. She squinted against the harsh brightness, her mind still clouded with a fog of confusion. The beeping of the heart monitor, the murmur of nurses in the hallway. It all seemed so distant, as if she was floating outside of herself. The events of the day, the divorce, the collapse, felt like fragments of a bad dream. She tried to piece them together, but the jumbled pieces just wouldn't fit. She couldn't remember how she had gotten here, only the feeling of Ethan's strong arms lifting her from the ground. the faint scent of his cologne filling the air around her as he'd rushed her through the hospital doors. But now, she was alone. Her body ached, and her chest felt hollow. She reached out instinctively for the glass of water on the bedside table, her hands trembling as she wrapped her fingers around the cool surface. The simple act felt too foreign, too demanding, but it brought her back to reality. She could hear the faint echo of a voice in the hallway, and her heart skipped. Ethan. She hadn't seen him since he had spoken to the doctor, his words still ringing in her ears. "She's my wife." Sophie shook her head. What was that? She didn't even know him. He wasn't her husband. But in that moment, when everything had felt like it was slipping away, his presence had been a lifeline. It had felt like something more than just an act of kindness. It had felt like hope. But why had he said what he did? What was he really doing here? As she swallowed the water, Sophie closed her eyes, trying to slow her racing thoughts. But the questions kept flooding in. Who was Ethan Lawson? Why had he been so insistent on helping me? What did he want from me? The soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It creaked open slightly, and Ethan stepped into the room, his tall frame blocking out the hallway light for a moment. He looked at her with soft, steady eyes, his concern evident despite the calmness in his demeanor. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice warm yet carrying a weight that she couldn't quite place. Sophie managed a weak smile, the kind of smile you give when you don't know what else to do. "I'm better. Just tired, I guess." Ethan nodded, his eyes scanning her face for any signs of distress. "You've been through a lot. I'm glad you're awake." There was an awkward silence as he stepped inside and pulled up a chair beside her bed. Sophie's thoughts raced, but she kept them inside. She wasn't sure what to make of this man. He had come to her rescue when she had nothing left, when she was on the verge of collapse. Yet, there was something about him. Something that didn't quite make sense. Why had he been so quick to step in? She could still hear his voice from earlier. "She's my wife." He wasn't her husband. She hadn't been married for more than a few hours. So why would he lie? Sophie took another sip of water to avoid looking him directly in the eye. She wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. But his presence was comforting, and there was something in his eyes that suggested a depth of understanding she wasn't used to seeing from strangers. As Ethan sat there, Sophie's mind drifted. She didn't know much about Ethan. He was a stranger in every sense of the word, a man who had appeared out of nowhere in her most vulnerable moment. Yet, as she looked at him, she noticed something in his gaze that reminded her of herself. A kind of pain, a kind of weariness that came from loss. Suddenly, a thought surfaced from the back of her mind. Was he going through his own divorce too? Sophie turned to face him. "I don't know why you helped me," she said quietly, trying to read his expression. "You didn't have to. You didn't even know me." Ethan met her gaze with a somber look. "I've been where you are," he said, his voice low. "I know what it feels like to lose everything. I couldn't just walk away. I didn't want to leave you in that kind of pain." Sophie couldn't help but be surprised by his words. There was something real in them, something raw. She'd never expected him to be so open, so vulnerable. "I don't know how to explain it," he continued, almost to himself. "But I saw you and I felt like I had to help. I don't know why. Maybe it's just that when you've been broken, you want to fix something, even if it's just a little piece of yourself." Sophie stared at him, a knot forming in her throat. So he had been broken too. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she hesitated before asking, "Who broke you?" Ethan let out a breath, his gaze shifting to the floor. "Clara," he said softly. "My ex-wife." Sophie nodded, sensing that he wasn't ready to go into more detail. She didn't press him. Instead, she absorbed what he'd said, letting the vulnerability in his voice settle into her bones. He wasn't just helping her. He was helping himself, too. As the hours passed, Sophie grew more comfortable in Ethan's presence. There was an unexpected warmth about him, something about the way he genuinely cared. But her lingering doubts remained. Why had he lied to the doctors? He couldn't possibly be her husband. That was something she knew for sure. And yet, Ethan's calm demeanor and steady gaze made her feel like he was more than just a random stranger. He was someone who understood her pain in a way that no one else could. Later that evening, Sophie sat up in bed, staring out of the hospital window at the dimming sky. She was still reeling from the divorce, still trying to make sense of her life. The betrayal, the loss, the emptiness, it all swirled around her like a storm. But Ethan's kindness had softened the blow, even if it didn't answer all the questions she had. Who was he really? Just then, Ethan appeared at the door, his eyes meeting hers with a quiet determination. "I'm going to be here for as long as you need me," he said. "You don't have to do this alone." Sophie blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everything feels like it's falling apart." Ethan pulled up a chair next to her bed again, his face softening. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Take it one day at a time. I'll be here for whatever you need." Sophie looked at him for a long moment, something stirring inside her. She wasn't sure if it was trust or gratitude, or something else entirely. But she knew one thing for sure. She didn't have to face the storm alone anymore, and that realization was a small comfort in a world that had felt utterly empty just hours before. The next few days passed in a blur. Sophie still couldn't shake the feeling of disorientation, but she found herself relying on Ethan more than she had ever relied on anyone before. He visited her every day, checking in on her, making sure she was comfortable. His presence had a calming effect, and for the first time since the divorce, Sophie allowed herself to lean into that comfort. And as she spent more time with him, she began to open up. Slowly, at first. She shared the painful details of her marriage to Tristan, the lies, the betrayals, the way her life had unraveled when she had found out about his affair. Each word felt like a release, a shedding of the weight that had been crushing her for so long. Ethan listened patiently, his gaze never faltering, his hands clasped in front of him. "You didn't deserve that," he said gently after she had finished recounting the worst parts. "You didn't deserve any of it." Sophie nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I just don't know how to move on. Everything feels so empty. I don't even know where to begin." Ethan's expression softened, and he reached over, placing a hand on hers. "One step at a time, Sophie. One step at a time." In that moment, something shifted in Sophie. Maybe it was his touch. Maybe it was the kindness in his eyes. But whatever it was, she felt something deep within her stir. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was a connection. A connection that she hadn't expected, but one that she needed more than she had realized. And as the days passed, Sophie began to wonder if this unexpected stranger, this man with his own scars, might be the one to help her find her way back to herself. Sophie's days in the hospital had passed in a haze. Each moment felt like an eternity, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't yet answer. She had slowly started to trust Ethan, allowing his calm presence to soothe the storm that raged inside her. Yet, the unease lingered. She hadn't expected to feel this way, this close to someone she barely knew. She didn't want to need him, but somewhere deep down, she realized she did. His kindness had given her a sense of stability that she desperately needed, but the truth still weighed heavily on her. She had been married to Tristan just days ago, and her heart was still tangled in that mess. Sophie sat up in her hospital bed, staring out the window at the overcast sky. The steady rhythm of the heart monitor was the only sound filling the room, a quiet reminder of how fragile she felt. She couldn't help but think of her future. What now? What did she do next? And in all that uncertainty, the biggest question still loomed. How was she going to raise a child when her entire world had been turned upside down? Just as she was about to retreat into herself again, the door creaked open, and Ethan stepped inside, a warm cup of tea in his hand. He had a kind smile on his face, but she could tell by the way his eyes lingered on her that he wasn't sure how to act around her anymore. "How are you feeling today?" Ethan asked softly as he walked over to the side of the bed, offering the tea. Sophie hesitated, taking the cup from him and holding it between her hands. The warmth felt comforting, like a small refuge from the storm inside her mind. "Better, I guess," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Still, I don't know, just trying to figure everything out." Ethan nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to figure it all out today," he said, his voice steady. "One step at a time." Sophie appreciated the sentiment, but the weight of her situation was crushing. There was no step-by-step guide for what came next. She wasn't sure how to take care of herself, let alone bring a new life into the world. "Thank you for everything you've done," Sophie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how much longer I can keep going like this. It all feels like too much." Ethan's hand rested gently on hers. "You don't have to do it alone, Sophie," he said, his voice firm, like a promise. "I'm here. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." His words were comforting, but they also sparked a quiet conflict deep inside her. She hadn't asked for his help, hadn't asked for his involvement in her life. Yet, here he was, steadfast, unyielding, and undeniably present. The next day, Sophie was scheduled for a routine checkup, a simple follow-up to ensure everything was progressing as it should. But as the nurse handed her the paperwork, Sophie felt her heart race. The doctor would be able to tell her what she'd been avoiding. Was she really pregnant? And if so, what did that mean for her future? She couldn't look at the forms any longer. She handed them back to the nurse with shaky hands. It was becoming real. The pregnancy, the baby, the reminder of Tristan and the life she thought she'd have. The thought of carrying Tristan's child made her stomach churn. When the doctor arrived, Sophie felt the familiar knot of dread tightening in her chest. Dr. Clarkson was a calm and competent man, his gentle demeanor always putting patients at ease. But today, Sophie just wanted the appointment to be over. "How are we feeling today, Sophie?" Dr. Clarkson asked, settling into his chair and flipping through her chart. Sophie swallowed hard. "I'm okay. A little tired, but nothing out of the ordinary." The doctor nodded, reviewing the information on the chart before turning back to her. "I just want to take a quick ultrasound, make sure everything is on track. It's been a stressful time for you, so I'll be brief." Sophie's heart skipped a beat as she nodded. She tried to push away the emotions bubbling up inside her, but they were there, lingering in the back of her mind. As the ultrasound began, Sophie tried to focus on the screen. The image was fuzzy at first, but the outline of the baby began to take shape, and Sophie's heart thudded in her chest. She could hear the faint sound of the baby's heartbeat, rhythmic and strong. "Everything looks good," Dr. Clarkson said, his voice soothing. "There's nothing to worry about. You're about 6 weeks along. That's right on track." Sophie felt a lump in her throat. It was real. She was going to have a child with Tristan. The realization hit her hard, and for a moment, she thought she might collapse again, this time from the sheer weight of what she was carrying. As the ultrasound finished, Dr. Clarkson smiled at her. "We'll keep monitoring, but it's looking good. How are you doing emotionally?" Sophie's lips trembled as she met his gaze. "It's just so much. I don't know what to do." The doctor's expression softened. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. Just focus on taking care of yourself, and we'll take it one step at a time." When Sophie returned to her hospital room, she felt like she was walking through a fog. She wanted to process the news, the confirmation of her pregnancy, but it was hard to focus with everything else swirling around her. Her marriage to Tristan was over, and now she was carrying his child. She should have been happy, right? Most women would be. But Sophie wasn't ready to be a mother. She wasn't ready to be tied to Tristan in any way, especially after everything he'd put her through. Sitting by her window, her mind spiraling, Sophie didn't even hear the door open. "Sophie?" Ethan's voice broke through her thoughts. "How did the appointment go?" She turned, and for a moment, the flood of emotions in her eyes caught Ethan off guard. He stepped closer, his face full of concern. "Sophie?" "I'm pregnant," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan's face softened, and he sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. We'll figure this out together." Sophie turned to him, her eyes red from the tears she hadn't let fall. "I don't know if I can do this, Ethan. Carrying his child. It feels like I'm still tied to him. I don't know if I can live with that." Ethan paused, considering his words carefully. "You don't have to do it alone, Sophie. I know it's complicated, but you're not alone in this." Sophie looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She didn't know if she was ready to trust again, but in that moment, Ethan was the only anchor she had left. As the days passed, Ethan found himself growing more and more attached to Sophie. It wasn't just because of the pregnancy, but because of who she was, strong, despite the pain she was carrying, and resilient, even in her lowest moments. The way she opened up to him, sharing the rawness of her grief and the uncertainty of her future, made him want to protect her more than ever. He hadn't planned on getting involved in her life like this. He hadn't planned on feeling this way about her. But there was something about Sophie that drew him in, a depth he couldn't ignore. And as her due date loomed closer, he found himself becoming more and more attached, not just to Sophie, but to the child she was carrying. He saw Leo as his own, even if he wasn't the biological father. The more time Sophie spent with Ethan, the more she began to see the goodness in him. But that also made the conflict inside her grow. She wasn't sure she could allow herself to lean on him, to trust him with her heart. The pain of her past was still too fresh, and the idea of moving forward, especially with someone like Ethan, felt impossible. Could she trust him? Could she allow herself to love again, knowing how much she had lost? What do you think? Let me hear your thoughts in the comment. The calm Sophie had begun to feel with Ethan's presence was abruptly shattered one afternoon. She had been resting in her apartment, a rare moment of quiet to gather her scattered thoughts, when her phone buzzed insistently on the coffee table. She picked it up hesitantly, only to see Tristan Cole's name glowing on the screen. Her stomach twisted at the sight. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She had survived the emotional roller coaster of their divorce. She would not subject herself to another round of heartbreak. Yet the next buzz made her hands tremble as if the mere presence of his name had a power over her. Then, almost before she could breathe, there came a knock at the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Standing on the other side was Tristan, dressed impeccably as always, his gaze searching hers like he had stepped straight out of her memories. The man who had once been her everything now looked like a stranger. Yet every familiar feature made it impossible to look away. "Sophie," he began, his voice low, tinged with regret. I need to talk to you." Sophie's first instinct was to slam the door in his face, but something in the way he held himself, the way he looked at her with a combination of pleading and shame, made her hesitate. She had spent years imagining this confrontation, rehearsing every word she would say. And yet, standing here, she felt an overwhelming surge of vulnerability. "Tristan, why are you here?" she asked cautiously, trying to steady her voice. "I've made mistakes," he admitted, his hands slightly trembling. "I know I hurt you, and I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right, for us, for our child." Sophie's heart sank. The mention of their unborn child, Leo, twisted her stomach. It reminded her of the life she had once envisioned with him, a life that was no longer hers. She wanted to believe him, wanted to hear the sincerity in his voice, but she remembered too clearly the nights she had spent crying over his betrayal, the betrayal that had shattered the foundation of their marriage. "You're not here for me," she said softly, stepping back. "You're here because you think you can control the future you abandoned." Tristan winced at her words, as if they had landed like a physical blow. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his tone desperate. "But I can't lose you. Not like this. I'm asking for a second chance." Sophie's eyes narrowed. A second chance? Tristan, don't you understand what you did? All the lies, the nights you spent with someone else while I trusted you. I built my life around us, and you shattered it. His jaw tightened. I know I failed you, Sophie, but I've changed. I want to be part of your life again. I want to be the father Leo deserves. Sophie's mind screamed at her. Part of my life? After everything? The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. They all surged together, a tidal wave of emotions she had tried to suppress in Ethan's calming presence. Tristan was testing her, manipulating her, and part of her still wanted to resist, to prove to herself that she was stronger than the man who had broken her heart. You're too late, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. I've already lost too much. You can't just show up and expect me to forget the pain. Tristan's eyes softened, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face. Please, Sophie. I made terrible choices. But the truth is, I don't want to lose you and Leo. I'll do anything to make things right. Sophie's resolve wavered. The thought of Tristan being involved in her child's life, the longing for the love she once felt, it all clawed at her. But she forced herself to stand taller, remembering the strength she had found in Ethan's unwavering support. She would not let Tristan's words, manipulations, or guilt trips steer her anymore. Not now. Not ever. I can't trust you, Tristan, she said firmly, her voice gaining strength. I won't let you manipulate me with apologies and promises. Leo deserves love and stability, not a father who chooses convenience over commitment. Tristan's face darkened, frustration simmering beneath the surface. Sophie, you don't understand. I can change. I want to be better. You had your chance, she replied sharply, and you blew it. I won't let you drag me back into a life filled with heartbreak. Not again. For a moment, silence hung in the room. Tristan stared at her, the fight leaving his posture, replaced with a mix of frustration and wounded pride. Then, with a final glance, he said, "This isn't over. I'll make sure things don't go easy for you. You'll see." And with that, he turned and left, his steps heavy but purposeful, leaving Sophie trembling in the quiet apartment. Sophie sank into her couch, the weight of the encounter pressing down on her chest. She had expected him to come back, expected the confrontation to some degree. But the intensity, the manipulation, the insistence that he could reclaim what he had lost was suffocating. She had felt herself pulled into a dangerous emotional territory, one she knew she could not afford to tread. Tristan's return was a reminder that the past was never fully gone, that he still held power over her heart if she allowed it. But Sophie wasn't about to let him. She thought of Ethan, of the comfort and stability he had provided when her world had fallen apart. She thought of the way he had been by her side in the hospital, the quiet strength in his presence that had allowed her to breathe again. He had never betrayed her, never broken her trust, never left her feeling like she had to beg for love. The realization struck her with clarity. Tristan's motives had never truly been about her or Leo. His desire to reconcile was selfish, a way to regain control, to soothe his own ego rather than mend what he had destroyed. And Sophie would not fall for it. Not again. That evening, as Sophie sat alone in her apartment, she reflected on the confrontation. She could still feel the sting of his words, the weight of the emotions that Tristan had tried to manipulate. And yet, she also felt a quiet sense of empowerment. She had faced him, had told him exactly how it was, and had refused to let him dominate her future. It was a small victory, but an important one. She realized that her strength was not in denying the pain, but in refusing to let it control her decisions. Ethan called shortly after, his familiar voice a balm against the lingering anxiety. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern thick in his tone. Sophie exhaled slowly, letting herself relax a fraction. "I am," she replied, a hint of resolve in her voice. "He came back, tried to manipulate me, but I told him no. I won't let him have power over me." There was a pause on the line, then Ethan said softly, "I'm proud of you. That wasn't easy. Sophie smiled faintly, gratitude mingling with lingering doubt. I'm trying. It's hard, but I know I can't let the past dictate my future. You won't be alone, Ethan reminded her. I'm here. For you. For Leo. And as she hung up the phone, Sophie felt a renewed sense of determination. Tristan's presence had reminded her of the darkness of her past, but it had also reinforced the clarity of her present. She would not let him take control of her life again. She had survived his betrayal, and she would continue to survive. She would protect herself, protect Leo, and protect the fragile hope that Ethan had ignited in her heart. Tristan's return had shaken her, but it had also crystallized something crucial. Sophie was no longer the woman who had collapsed outside the courthouse. She had endured heartbreak, betrayal, and manipulation, and she was still standing. And as she looked toward the future, with Ethan at her side, even in an undefined role, she realized that her life was beginning to take a turn towards something new, something stronger, and something real. The weeks following Tristan's unwelcome return had been a whirlwind for Sophie. Though she had stood her ground, refusing to allow him to manipulate her, the emotional toll lingered. Her nights were restless, filled with the echoes of his voice, the lingering memories of betrayal, and the uncertainty of what the future might hold. And yet, through it all, Ethan remained, a quiet, steady presence in the chaos of her life. He was there in the mornings with a gentle knock at the door, a warm smile, and a cup of tea he never failed to prepare. He was there in the evenings, checking in to ensure she had eaten, slept, and taken care of herself. Ethan didn't ask for anything, didn't demand attention, and never pressured her. He simply existed as a pillar of stability, a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. And, little by little, Sophie found herself relying on him more than she had ever anticipated. But there was one thing she hadn't anticipated: the depth of his attachment, not just to her, but to the child growing inside her. Ethan had never planned to step so far into Sophie's life, but the moment he learned about the pregnancy, something shifted within him. He felt a fierce, protective instinct stir, an unyielding need to care for her and for the baby. He hadn't expected to feel this way, to be so moved by a life he hadn't created himself. Yet there it was, a connection he couldn't ignore. He found himself imagining the future, picturing himself by Sophie's side through every challenge, every milestone. He thought about holding Leo for the first time, watching him grow, teaching him things, guiding him, and being the kind of father that the child deserved. It was no longer just about helping Sophie. It was about embracing a responsibility he had never anticipated but couldn't resist. When he looked at Sophie, he no longer saw just a woman in pain. He saw resilience. He saw a mother. He saw someone worth fighting for, not because she needed saving, but because she was remarkable in every sense of the word. And the more time he spent with her, the deeper his feelings grew. Sophie, on the other hand, struggled to reconcile her own emotions. She was growing closer to Ethan, undeniably. His calm presence and unwavering support had become a source of comfort she couldn't ignore. And yet, the weight of the past, the memory of Tristan's betrayal, and the knowledge that she carried Tristan's child made every step forward complicated. She found herself caught between the longing for safety and the fear of opening her heart again. Ethan hadn't betrayed her, hadn't lied, and hadn't left her to face despair alone. But could she trust him fully? Could she allow herself to lean on someone else when Tristan's shadow still haunted her? Her mind was a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to run, to retreat into herself, to remain untouchable and protected from further pain. Yet another part longed to reach for Ethan, to accept the comfort he offered, to let someone in for the first time since her life had shattered. One evening, as Sophie rested in bed, Ethan sat nearby, his eyes fixed on her. He had noticed the subtle tension in her expression over the past few days, the way she would flinch when thinking about Tristan, the way she hesitated to meet his gaze when discussing the future. "Sophie," he said gently, breaking the silence, "I know this isn't easy. I can't even imagine how overwhelming it feels. Everything that's happened. Everything you've been through." Sophie looked at him, her eyes brimming with a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "It's complicated," she admitted, her voice quivering. "I don't know how to feel about any of it. About Tristan, about the baby, about you." Ethan nodded, his expression solemn but tender. "You don't have to figure it out right now. But know this, I want to be here for you. Not because I expect anything in return, but because I care. Because I see you. And I see what you've endured." The words were simple, yet they carried weight. Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. He didn't ask for gratitude. He didn't ask for love. He simply offered his presence, his commitment, and his unwavering support. And in that moment, Sophie realized something she hadn't before. Ethan's feelings weren't fleeting. He was choosing to be present, to stand by her and Leo, to accept the responsibility he had never sought but now embraced wholeheartedly. Ethan's vulnerability was something Sophie noticed, a glimpse into the man he had been before life had hardened him. One quiet evening, as they sat together on the balcony overlooking the city, he spoke softly about his own past. "My marriage with Clara. It ended because I wasn't enough," he confessed, his voice low and sincere. "I made mistakes, Sophie. I loved her, but I wasn't capable of being the man she needed at the time. And I lost everything because of it." Sophie listened intently, the raw honesty in his voice striking a chord within her. She could see the scars beneath his composed exterior, the pain he carried, the regret, the lessons learned. And yet, despite his own past, he was offering her a sense of security he had never demanded, a kind of selfless commitment she had never known. "You've been through so much," he continued, his gaze locked on hers. "But I see the strength in you, Sophie, the courage, the resilience. You're not broken. You're remarkable." Sophie's heart fluttered at his words. She wasn't sure if it was admiration, affection, or something more profound, but it was undeniable. She had felt alone for so long, abandoned by Tristan, betrayed and heartbroken. And now, in Ethan, she was beginning to see someone who was willing to stand beside her through it all. Not for what he could gain, but because he genuinely wanted to. The turning point came one afternoon when Ethan made a decision that shocked Sophie. He had quietly been researching adoption processes, legal documents, and parental rights, not for himself, but for Leo. Without consulting her, he had taken the steps to file for adoption, ensuring that Leo would have a stable and loving father regardless of the complications in their lives. When Sophie discovered this, she felt a mixture of astonishment, confusion, and gratitude. "Ethan, you did what?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. He looked at her, his expression earnest. "I filed for Leo's adoption. I wanted to make sure he has a father figure who will always be there for him. Someone he can rely on, someone who loves him." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But you didn't even ask me. How could you?" "I know," Ethan interrupted gently, taking her hand in his. "I should have spoken to you first. I couldn't stand by knowing that Leo might not have someone to protect him and love him the way he deserves. I couldn't wait." Sophie's heart swelled with a complex mix of emotions. She was shocked, yes, but she also felt an overwhelming sense of relief and gratitude. In that moment, she understood the depth of Ethan's commitment, not just to her, but to the child she carried. He wasn't acting out of obligation or duty. He was acting out of love, compassion, and a sense of responsibility that transcended biology. Sophie spent the next few days reflecting on Ethan's actions and her own feelings. The truth was undeniable. She had begun to trust him, to rely on him, and to see him as more than just a stranger who had rescued her. His unexpected commitment had not only provided stability for Leo, but had also given her the courage to face the complexities of her own heart. She realized that while the past with Tristan had left scars, it had also prepared her to recognize genuine love when it appeared. And in Ethan, she had found someone who was not just present in the easy moments, but steadfast in the hardest ones. the man who would choose to stand by her and Leo, no matter the challenges. For the first time since her collapse outside the courthouse, Sophie felt a sense of hope. A cautious, fragile hope that perhaps life could be different, that perhaps she could find love again, and that perhaps Leo would grow up in a home filled with care, stability, and warmth. Ethan's unexpected commitment was more than just a legal step. It was a symbol of his promise, a tangible representation of his devotion to both Sophie and Leo. It was a silent declaration that he would not abandon them, that he would not falter when the weight of the world threatened to overwhelm them. And for Sophie, that was the anchor she had been searching for. She didn't yet know how their story would unfold, how the future might test them, or what challenges lay ahead. But for the first time in months, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel a flicker of security, and to believe that maybe, just maybe, love could still exist beyond heartbreak, beyond betrayal, and beyond the shadows of the past. Sophie had begun to carve out a fragile sense of normalcy in her life. Days were no longer spent in paralyzing despair, and nights no longer felt like an endless loop of heartbreak. Ethan's unwavering presence had become a source of stability, a steady reminder that she could survive and even thrive despite the scars Tristan had left behind. She was learning to breathe again, to take life one day at a time, and to trust herself, and perhaps, eventually, to trust someone else. But just as Sophie was beginning to feel that sense of equilibrium, Tristan made his appearance once more. The knock on her apartment door came late one evening, echoing through the quiet space like a forewarning of the storm to come. Sophie's heart lurched violently in her chest. She knew it was him before she even looked at the peephole. And for a fleeting second she contemplated ignoring him, pretending she wasn't home. But curiosity, and perhaps a part of her that still ached from the remnants of love she had once felt, compelled her to answer. Standing on her doorstep was Tristan, dressed sharply as always. But this time there was a visible tension in his posture, a vulnerability Sophie had never seen before. His eyes held a mix of regret, desperation, and something else she couldn't quite place. "Sophie," he began, his voice low, almost pleading. "Please, I need to talk to you." Sophie's chest tightened. She had faced him before, had stood her ground after his previous attempts at manipulation. But this time, there was a rawness to him that unsettled her. She allowed him into the apartment, though her gaze never wavered from him, cold and guarded. I've been thinking," Tristan started, pacing the small living room as if words alone weren't enough. "I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I was selfish, careless, and I hurt you in ways I can't begin to explain. I want to make amends." Sophie crossed her arms, the walls she had built around her heart holding firm. "Make amends?" she repeated incredulously. "After everything you've done? After the lies, the betrayal, the nights I spent crying alone while you were with someone else?" Tristan's jaw tightened. "I know. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I can't bear the thought of losing you and Leo. I want to be a part of your life, Sophie. I want to be a father to our child. I want a second chance with you." Sophie's throat tightened, her mind a whirlwind of anger, pain, and disbelief. "A second chance? Tristan, you don't get to rewrite the past. You had your chance and you squandered it. I don't even know if you want me, or if you just want to fix your own mistakes." "I do want you," he said, desperation threading his words. "I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But I've changed. I can be the man you deserve. I will do whatever it takes to earn back your trust." Sophie's hands trembled at his intensity. For a moment, she allowed herself to remember the man she had once loved. The warmth, the laughter, the comfort. But the memory quickly twisted into the pain he had caused. The nights of betrayal, the hollow promises, and the shattered trust. She could not, would not, let herself fall for that illusion again. "You think words can erase the years of pain?" she demanded, her voice rising. "You think apologies can undo the nights I cried myself to sleep? wondering why the person I trusted most had abandoned me emotionally, physically, and morally. I loved you, Tristan. I gave you everything, and you threw it away. Tristan's face softened, a flicker of genuine remorse crossing his features. I know, he admitted quietly. I know I don't deserve you. I know I don't deserve Leo. But I'm asking for one last chance. Please, let me prove that I can be better. Sophie's chest tightened. She felt the weight of her own emotions pressing down on her, threatening to crumble the resolve she had painstakingly built. The desire to forgive, to try again, even for a moment, tugged at her heart. She could see the vulnerability in Tristan, the raw honesty, the regret. But she knew, deep down, that it wasn't enough. Not this time. I've reflected on this long and hard, Sophie said slowly, her voice steady now. And I've realized something important. I cannot go back to the life I had with you. I cannot trust you again. And even if you truly want to change, even if you genuinely want to be a father to Leo, I cannot let you back into my heart. Not now. Not ever. Tristan flinched as if struck. Sophie, please, think about Leo. Think about our family. Don't you see that I'm asking for us? I see exactly who you are, she replied, her voice firm. You are the man who left me broken, who betrayed my trust, who put your own selfish desires above everything that mattered to me. You do not get to dictate my future. You do not get to manipulate my emotions. You are a part of my past, Tristan, and that is where you will stay. Tristan's eyes narrowed, frustration and hurt battling within him. This isn't fair, he snapped. You're throwing away everything we had. You're throwing away me. I am not throwing away myself, Sophie said, her voice unwavering. I am not throwing away Leo. I am not throwing away the chance for a future where love doesn't hurt. You had your chance, Tristan. You lost it. And now, I have to move forward, with or without you. For a long moment, the room was silent. Tristan's anger and desperation slowly gave way to resignation. He realized that Sophie's words were not threats, they were final declarations. He had no power here, no leverage, no ability to sway the woman he had hurt so deeply. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer, almost hollow. I understand, he said. But know this, Sophie. I will make sure that your life isn't easy. I'll be a presence, whether you like it or not. You'll see. Sophie's eyes narrowed, a surge of defiance rising in her chest. You can try all you want, Tristan, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. But I will not let you control me. I will not let you hurt me again. You are no longer a part of my life. This is the last time we speak like this. Tristan hesitated, then gave a final nod, turning to leave. The click of the door closing behind him echoed like thunder in the apartment, leaving Sophie trembling but resolute. She sank onto the couch, her body quivering with residual fear and anger, but also with a sense of empowerment she had not felt in years. Tristan's return had reminded her of the pain she had endured, but it had also illuminated the strength she now possessed. She was no longer the woman who had collapsed outside the courthouse, no longer the woman who would bend under his manipulations. She had survived his betrayal, and she would continue to survive, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. Later that evening, Ethan arrived as usual, his presence immediately comforting. Sophie looked at him, tears still glimmering in her eyes, but this time they were mixed with relief. Everything okay? He asked, sitting beside her, his gaze steady and unwavering. Sophie nodded slowly, drawing a deep breath. Yes. Tristan came back. Tried to manipulate me. Tried to guilt me. But I stood my ground. I won't let him have power over me, Ethan. I won't. Ethan reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. I'm proud of you, Sophie. That wasn't easy, but you did it. You didn't let him control your future. And that's what matters. Sophie looked at him, feeling the weight of the day and the storm of emotions she had endured. It's over, she said firmly. I can finally breathe. I can finally move forward. Ethan smiled softly, his eyes full of reassurance. And you won't have to do it alone. Not ever. Sophie allowed herself a small, grateful smile. For the first time since the divorce, she felt a flicker of peace. The past had tried to claw its way back, but she had held strong. And with Ethan by her side, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever Tristan might attempt, she could face them with courage, resilience, and hope. The encounter had reminded her of the shadows of her past, but it had also illuminated the path toward a future she could finally claim. One where she and Leo could live free from betrayal, fear, and manipulation. And as she leaned back against the couch, her heart steadied by the presence of someone who truly cared, Sophie knew that the next chapter of her life had only just begun. Should the apology be accepted, let us know in the comment. Sophie had been living with the quiet tension Tristan's threats had left behind. Though she had stood her ground in their last encounter, a part of her still felt the lingering shadow of his presence, like a storm cloud hovering at the edge of her life. The memory of his desperate eyes, his attempts at manipulation, and his arrogant insistence that he could reclaim what he had lost gnawed at her. She knew that, sooner or later, she would need to face him once and for all, not with fear or desperation, but with clarity and authority. Ethan had sensed her unease and, over the past days, had encouraged her to confront Tristan. "You need to do this for yourself, Sophie," he said one evening as they sat together on the balcony. "You've been strong, but standing up to him one last time will free you completely. Not for him, for you." Sophie had nodded silently, but inside, her nerves buzzed with anxiety. She had rehearsed what she would say, how she would stand tall, how she would finally sever the ties that Tristan had tried to manipulate. And now, as she waited outside her office building, seeing him arrive in his sleek car, she knew the moment had come. Tristan stepped out, his expression confident, but Sophie could see the flicker of unease in his eyes when he spotted her. He approached, clearly expecting some degree of surrender, some flicker of doubt in her resolve. "Hello, Sophie," he began casually, as if they were two strangers discussing the weather. "I wanted to talk, sort things out." Sophie squared her shoulders, the anger, hurt, and resolve she had been holding in check boiling to the surface. She looked him straight in the eye. "We have nothing to talk about, Tristan. You're a part of my past, and you will stay there." His confident facade faltered. "Sophie, I came here because I still care. Because I made mistakes, and I want to fix them. Don't you want that too?" Sophie's hands clenched at her sides, her voice rising, clear and unwavering. "Fix them? Tristan, do you understand what you've done? Do you understand the years of lies, the betrayal, the nights I spent crying alone, wondering why the person I loved the most could betray me so completely? You don't get to fix that. You don't get to manipulate my emotions with empty apologies and promises. That chapter is over. You are over." Tristan took a step closer, his tone almost pleading. "I've changed, Sophie. I want to make things right. I want a future with you, with our child." Sophie shook her head, tears glistening in her eyes, not from weakness, but from the power she felt in her own voice. "Our child doesn't need you to be anything other than responsible. He doesn't need you to manipulate his mother, and I certainly don't need you back in my life. I'm done. I've survived the betrayal, Tristan, and I will survive the rest of my life without you." Her words hit like a hammer, and for a moment, Tristan's eyes reflected the shock of being confronted with the truth of his own actions. He had thought he could intimidate her, guilt her, or sway her with his presence. But Sophie was no longer the frightened, heartbroken woman who had once clung to him. She was empowered, and he could see it. You don't understand," Tristan stammered, frustration seeping into his voice. "I'm trying to be better. You're throwing away everything we had." Sophie stepped closer, her voice calm yet unwavering, the power of her own resolve resonating with each word. "Everything we had? Tristan, you threw it away the moment you betrayed me. You are no longer a part of that life, and I refuse to let you control my future. You have no place here." Tristan's jaw tightened. He stared at her, the reality of her independence and strength striking him harder than he had expected. For the first time, he realized that Sophie had truly moved beyond him. His power over her had vanished, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and would not compromise it for anyone, least of all him. Sophie's chest swelled with a mixture of relief and triumph. This confrontation, which she had dreaded for so long, was not just about Tristan. It was about reclaiming her life, asserting her boundaries, and declaring that she would no longer be defined by the pain of the past. She had survived heartbreak, manipulation, and betrayal, and now she stood unshaken. Ethan had accompanied her, standing just behind her, a quiet support in her corner. He had not interrupted, had not spoken a word, but his presence gave Sophie strength. She glanced at him, feeling the reassurance in his steady gaze, and allowed herself a faint smile. She didn't need anyone to rescue her now. She could do it herself. But Ethan's unwavering support reminded her that she didn't have to face life alone. As Tristan's face twisted in frustration, and he finally turned to leave, Sophie took a deep, steadying breath. The weight of his threats, his manipulations, and his selfish desires lifted, leaving behind a sense of liberation she hadn't felt in years. "You will not control me," she called after him, her voice echoing with finality. "This is my life. You are out of it, forever." Tristan paused at the doorway, his expression unreadable. Then, without another word, he walked away, leaving Sophie standing there, unshaken, empowered, and free. Sophie's hand trembled as she turned to Ethan, a sense of peace washing over her. "It's done," she said softly. "I told him. I've taken back my life." Ethan reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I knew you could do it," he said quietly. "You're stronger than you know." Sophie exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. For the first time in months, she felt truly unburdened. She had faced the shadows of her past, confronted the man who had hurt her, and emerged victorious. And with Ethan by her side, she could finally imagine a future free from fear, full of hope, and filled with the possibility of love again. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sophie allowed herself to reflect on how far she had come. The collapse outside the courthouse, the betrayal of Tristan, the uncertainty of her pregnancy. All of it had led her to this moment of clarity and empowerment. She had survived the darkness and emerged with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. And as she looked at Ethan, standing quietly beside her, she felt something else stirring within her. A sense of trust, safety, and even a spark of hope for the love that could grow from this new chapter of her life. For the first time, Sophie understood that liberation wasn't just about breaking free from the past. It was about reclaiming her voice, asserting her worth, and allowing herself to embrace a future filled with possibilities. And for Sophie Matthews, that future was finally within reach. The early morning light filtered softly through the curtains of the hospital room, painting the walls in gentle shades of gold and pink. Sophie lay in the crisp white sheets, her body exhausted, but her heart brimming with anticipation. Months of uncertainty, fear, and emotional turmoil had led to this moment, the day she would finally meet her child, the child that symbolized both the past she could not change and the future she was determined to embrace. Ethan sat quietly in the chair beside her bed, his hand resting over hers. He had been with her through every doctor's visit, every moment of doubt, every restless night. And now, as labor began, his presence was more than comforting. It was a lifeline. His eyes, steady and filled with love, met hers as he whispered, "You're going to be amazing, Sophie. I'll be right here with you." Sophie squeezed his hand in return, a mixture of gratitude and nervousness coursing through her veins. She had imagined this day countless times in her mind, always fearing what it would feel like to hold a life that carried the weight of Tristan's betrayal. Yet now, looking at Ethan and feeling his unwavering support, she realized that this child's arrival would not only mark a beginning for Leo, it would mark a new beginning for her too. Hours passed in a blur of pain, determination, and quiet encouragement. The nurses moved with practiced efficiency, guiding Sophie through each contraction, offering comfort and reassurance. Ethan never left her side, speaking in calm tones, offering a steady presence that reminded her she wasn't alone. At one point, during a particularly intense contraction, Sophie's hand gripped Ethan's arm with surprising strength. "I can't. I don't know if I can do this," she gasped. Ethan's voice was firm but gentle. "Yes, you can. Look at me, Sophie. You are strong, braver than you realize, and you are not alone. Leo is almost here, and we'll meet him together." With that promise, Sophie found the courage to push forward, to fight through the waves of pain, and to finally welcome the life she had been carrying for months. And then, at last, a cry pierced the air, a sound so fragile yet so strong it made Sophie's heart ache with emotion. "It's a boy," the nurse announced, placing the tiny, squirming bundle in Sophie's arms. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled Leo for the first time. The weight of him against her chest, the rhythm of his breathing, the tiny grip of his fingers around hers. It all felt like a miracle. The months of fear, heartbreak, and uncertainty were eclipsed by this overwhelming surge of love. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a chance to heal, to move on, and to embrace a life filled with hope. Ethan leaned in close, his eyes glistening with emotion. "He's perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." Sophie looked up at him, the enormity of their shared journey washing over her. The man who had appeared on the courthouse steps weeks ago, a stranger who had lifted her from despair, was now standing beside her as more than just a witness to her pain. He was her partner in this new chapter of life. And as she gazed at Ethan, she realized that the bond they shared had grown stronger, deeper, and more unshakable than anything she had ever imagined. The days that followed were filled with tender moments, sleepless nights, and the quiet joy of discovering a new rhythm as a family. Ethan was there for every feeding, every diaper change, every small smile from Leo that made Sophie's heart swell. He offered guidance without judgment, patience without complaint, and unwavering love without expectation. For Sophie, the transformation was profound. She was no longer the fragile, heartbroken woman who had collapsed outside the courthouse. She was a mother, strong and determined, who had faced the pain of betrayal, the uncertainty of her pregnancy, and the fear of the future, and had emerged stronger. The presence of Ethan beside her had shown her that love could be gentle, steadfast, and transformative. One quiet evening, as Sophie and Ethan sat together in the nursery, cradling Leo between them, Ethan turned to her, his eyes filled with emotion. "Sophie, there's something I want to ask you." Sophie looked at him, curiosity mingled with fatigue. "What is it?" He took a deep breath, his hands holding hers gently. "I want to be your family, not just here, not just now, but for every moment to come. I want to marry you, Sophie. I want us, me, you, and Leo, to be a family, officially, completely." Sophie's heart skipped a beat. The words felt like the culmination of everything she had endured, the heartbreak, the fear, the struggle, and the hope that had gradually taken root. She looked down at Leo, sleeping peacefully in her arms, and then back at Ethan. His eyes were full of sincerity, love, and unwavering commitment. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Ethan. I want that too." The relief and joy in Ethan's expression mirrored her own. In that moment, the journey they had shared, through betrayal, heartbreak, uncertainty, and fear, culminated in a promise of love, unity, and hope. They were no longer defined by the pain of the past, nor by the mistakes of others. They were defined by their choice to embrace each other, their love for Leo, and the future they would build together. As the hospital room settled into quiet after their shared moment, Sophie reflected on everything that had brought her here. The collapse outside the courthouse, Tristan's betrayal, the uncertainty of her pregnancy, and the unwavering support of Ethan had all shaped her journey. She had learned that strength was not just in surviving pain, but in allowing oneself to hope, to trust, and to love again. Leo's small fingers wrapped around hers, a perfect symbol of the future she now held in her hands. And with Ethan by her side, she knew that the path ahead, while full of challenges and uncertainties, would also be filled with love, laughter, and the security of a family built not just on blood, but on choice, commitment, and devotion. The day Leo was born was not only the beginning of his life, it was the beginning of a new chapter for Sophie and Ethan, one in which the shadows of the past no longer dictated the present, and the promise of love and family became a tangible, beautiful reality. The first morning in their shared home felt different from anything Sophie had ever experienced. The sunlight streamed through the windows, falling softly on the nursery where Leo slept, swaddled and peaceful. The gentle sound of his breathing, so steady and life-affirming, filled the room, bringing Sophie a sense of calm she hadn't known in months. Ethan sat beside her, holding a mug of coffee, his eyes fixed on Leo with a tenderness that warmed Sophie's heart. The past, the heartbreak, the betrayals, the uncertainty, felt like distant memories now. In this room, with her child and the man who had become her anchor, Sophie felt a quiet completeness she had thought was impossible. "This feels real," Sophie whispered, her voice soft with awe. "I never imagined it could feel like this. Peaceful, hopeful, like home." Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's real, Sophie. You've built it too. You've survived everything and created this life, this family. And we'll keep building it together." Sophie looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and love. The journey that had started with a collapse outside the courthouse, a stranger's kindness, and a heart full of pain had transformed into this. A life she could finally embrace, with love that was patient, steadfast, and unwavering. As the days turned into weeks, Sophie, Ethan, and Leo began to settle into a rhythm. Their home was filled with small joys, the soft coos and giggles of Leo, the quiet evenings spent planning his future, and the shared laughter that reminded Sophie how far they had come. Sophie marveled at how Ethan had seamlessly become a father to Leo, not by obligation, but by choice. Every moment of care, every gentle word, every patient lesson he imparted was a testament to his commitment. Sophie reflected on the lessons she had learned. She had discovered that family was not defined solely by blood. It was defined by love, loyalty, and the people who choose to stand by you through the darkest and brightest moments. In Ethan, she had found someone who loved her for who she was, who embraced Leo as his own, and who had chosen to create a home filled with security, warmth, and joy. Her past, with Tristan's betrayal and the pain it had caused, no longer dictated her present. She had faced heartbreak, stood her ground, and emerged stronger. And in doing so, she had carved out a future built not on fear, but on love, trust, and mutual respect. One afternoon, as Sophie watched Ethan play with Leo on the living room floor, she felt a wave of contentment wash over her. The sound of Leo's laughter, Ethan's gentle voice, the sun streaming through the windows, all of it seemed to affirm that she had made the right choices. She had chosen life, love, and family over bitterness and fear. Ethan looked up and caught her gaze, his eyes warm and full of unspoken promises. "You've done so much, Sophie," he said softly. "I see how strong you are, how much love you carry, and I'm grateful every day that we're building this life together." Sophie smiled, the emotions welling up inside her threatening to spill. "I never thought I'd find this," she admitted. "After everything, I didn't think love like this existed. Not for me. But you proved me wrong, Ethan. You've given me a life I didn't think I could have." Ethan reached for her hand, their fingers intertwining. "We've built it together," he said simply, "and we'll keep building it, one day at a time." As the evening settled in and Leo drifted off to sleep, Sophie allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the woman who had collapsed outside the courthouse, broken and abandoned. She remembered the pain, the betrayal, the uncertainty. And she realized how far she had come. Sophie had learned resilience. She had learned the power of standing her ground. She had learned that love, when real and selfless, could heal even the deepest wounds. And most importantly, she had learned that happiness was not something to wait for. It was something to create, with the people who truly cared and the choices she made for herself. Ethan and Leo had become more than companions. They had become her family, her anchor, her reason to believe in a future brighter than the past she had endured. Sophie felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had finally found the love and stability she had longed for, not because someone promised it, but because it had been built on trust, commitment, and genuine care. Sophie stood by the window that evening, gazing at the skyline as the city lights twinkled like stars. The past no longer haunted her. It had simply taught her lessons she would carry forward. The love she shared with Ethan and the joy she found in Leo's presence had become the foundation of her life, solid and unshakable. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her reverie. Ethan entered, smiling as he set down a small, wrapped package. "For you," he said, his eyes alight. Sophie opened it to find a delicate charm bracelet, each charm representing a milestone in their journey. Trust, hope, resilience, and love. Her eyes glistened with tears as she looked up at him. "I wanted you to have this," Ethan said softly. "A reminder of everything we've overcome and everything we still have to look forward to." Sophie placed the bracelet on her wrist, feeling the weight of it, not as a burden, but as a symbol of triumph. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Ethan pulled her into a gentle embrace, and Sophie felt a warmth she had never known. This was home. This was love. This was family. And in that embrace, Sophie Matthews knew she was finally whole. The journey from heartbreak to healing had been long and arduous, filled with moments of despair, doubt, and fear. But Sophie had emerged stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace life with open arms. She had chosen to let go of betrayal, to trust again, and to accept the love that had been patiently waiting for her. Leo's presence had brought purpose, joy, and unconditional love into her life, and Ethan's commitment had shown her what it meant to truly be seen and cherished. Together, they had built a family not defined by blood alone, but by devotion, trust, and the conscious choice to stand by one another. Sophie's past had taught her resilience, her present had offered love, and her future promised a life built on hope, happiness, and the family she had always dreamed of. And for the first time in her life, she felt the quiet certainty that she had everything she needed to be truly, completely happy. The journey had ended, but the story of their love, their family, and their shared life was only just beginning. Don't forget to subscribe. If you've enjoyed this story and want to stay updated, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Thanks.